Hey, good evening, everyone. It is Wednesday night and it's time for the network. I have a special guest tonight, and I'm so glad that you took your time to be here with us. Welcome again to the network. Good evening, good evening, good evening. And I'm so excited to be able to be here with you tonight. Every Wednesday night, we have the network, and our goals are to find community, gain connections, and experience compassion. Each week, we have a special featured guest, and this week's featured guest is none other than Ronald Brise, a government affairs consultant. Welcome, Ronald, to the network.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. It's my pleasure to be here with you this evening.
Man, Ronald, man, you have such a wide experience, and man, how did you kind of get into government affairs? Because that's something that it sounds like it could be a secret thing. It sounds like it's a very serious thing, but it sounds like there's a lot of moving parts to government affairs.
Sure, and thank you for the opportunity to engage with you this evening. So, government affairs is one of those areas that is, as you mentioned, far-reaching, and it encompasses many different facets. Some people call it government relations, some people call it lobbying, um, and I think government affairs is probably the broadest term for it. And so, you asked how I got into it. That's a interesting question. A little bit about my background will probably help the audience understand my path and my track and what allowed me to arrive at this point of my life in my career. So, um, almost 20 something years ago, I was having a conversation with some friends in my living room. At the time, I was a high school science teacher, and we were trying to figure out, as a group of young people, 20 something year olds, how to make our community better. And as part of that conversation, we decided, hey, if we're going to try to make our community better, one of us or some of us have to get more involved in the decision making process.
Wow.
And as a result of that conversation, we decided that we were going to start paying a whole lot more attention to what was going on within our community, starting to engage at our city meetings and things of that nature. And as started to get a little bit more involved and engaged, we realized that we truly had to take a much more active role and part in the process. And so, as a result of that initial conversation, that turned into what I would call a small movement. And it ended up with me deciding with the group of my friends that based upon where I lived, it would make sense for one of us to run for office. And because I live in the area which would benefit our community the most, it made sense for me to run for office. And initially, we were thinking about local office because
Mhm.
local offices generally have the greatest impact, the greatest day-to-day impact on individuals. They, deal with if your city has a local utility, they take care of that. They take care of trash pickup. They take care of street lights. They take care of potholes. Um, uh, Involved with local education and all of that. But I knew that I didn't necessarily want to be doing that
Yeah.
aspect of government.
Yeah.
But in the process, I got appointed to the city's planning commission.
Wow.
And the city's planning commission, and this was the city of North Miami. So the city of North Miami planning commission, just like planning commissions all over the country,
Yeah.
decide what gets built, when it gets built,
Yeah.
where it gets built, and very often who gets to build it.
Yeah.
So I got a lot of insight on that part of the process, being involved in that. And then we decided that I would run for state representative.
Wow.
So my first campaign was for state representative in 2002. The
Okay.
irony of that, I had gotten married in the year 2000.
Yeah.
And so 2 years into my marriage, um, have a conversation with my wife, Joanne, and hey, honey, I'm thinking about running for public office,
What a conversation.
right? And I'm thinking of running for a state representative. And so we got into that race. We ran that race. It was a six-way primary. I lost. I came in third in that race. And 4 years later, I ran for state house again. I won that race,
Wow.
and so I served the 108th district of the state of Florida. At the time, the district encompassed had about a population of about 135,000 people, which I represented in the state house. Professionally, at the time, I had left teaching and had become an executive with a telecom company
Wow.
um, that had operations in Miami and in Central and South America and the Caribbean. And so was serving in the House. I served in a variety of committees, appropriations, higher ed, energy and telecommunications, um, and a few other committees in the Florida House of Representatives. And from the Florida House of Representatives, I served one term, and then I served the second. I got elected to the second term without opposition. And subsequent to that, there was an opening at the Public Service Commission. And at that time, it's interesting how, and I know you're a believer and I'm a believer. It's interesting that how God opens specific doors at different times of your life. Um, and so I was sitting in the Florida House on the House floor one day, and
Yeah.
it was about 3 or 4 weeks before session was about to be done. And then a senator walks over to me and says, "Hey, I need to have a conversation with you."
Uh-oh.
I said, "What about? What's going on?" I know that. I thought he was going to talk about a bill that we were working on together. And so I went to the bubble. We went to the bubble, which is an area where people can talk privately. And
Yeah.
he said, "Look, there's going to be a seat that's going to open up on the Public Service Commission. And is that something that you would be interested in?" And I said, "Well, it's something I would think about. Frankly, based upon my plans, I thought I would, do 4 terms in the House, which would be 8 years, two
Sure.
terms in the Senate, which would be
Yeah.
another 8 years. And after that, I would consider the Public Service Commission." And he says, "Well, your timeline has just been shortened. And,
Wow.
and so if you are interested and, thinking about your background in telecom, we think that you would be a good fit." Now, there were no Black people on the commission at the time.
Sure.
And so as a result, that was one of the reasons there was going to be a change on the Public Service Commission at the time. So I decided to put my name in the hat for the Public Service Commission. Got appointed by Governor Charlie Crist at the time, got confirmed by the Senate, and then got appointed a second time by Governor Scott in 2014. And so I served 2 terms on the Public Service Commission. And this Public Service Commission, for those who don't know, um, regulates all the utilities in a state. So this state of Florida, where I live, regulated all of the um, energy companies, water and wastewater companies, the phone companies, and gas companies throughout the state of Florida. And so participated in that process, was very involved at the national level, represented um, all of the national commissioners on a few federal boards. And I also served as president of the Association of Commissioners for every state from Texas to North Carolina. So I had the opportunity to represent my colleagues in that way. And so when my term ended,
Hmm.
I I got offered an opportunity to join Gunster, which is a law firm. It's one of the state's oldest law firms, and it has a wide practice. We are a business law firm primarily,
Sure.
and so I head the government affairs practice for the firm. And as a government affairs professional, my job is to help companies engage with government, understand the functions of government, and essentially not be on the menu
Yeah,
when decisions are being made. So we help entities uh, manage their strategy with respect to policy, when to engage, when not to engage, how to engage, and we help them understand the process and which levers to engage in. Um, and so that's what government affairs professionals really do. They really help entities, or you handhold entities as they navigate through the government processes, and that's what we do.
man. I mean, Ronald, you gave us a whole lifetime of experience in what you shared as a summation of your journey thus far. And I could see that not only God's hand, providence, but also people's confidence in your skills and your abilities to be able to move in these ways, which some people look to as a lifetime or end goal for you. And man, I just want to celebrate and applaud you for all the things that you have accomplished. But man, when I got your resume, and I mean, it's a lot of resume things, a lot of awards, a lot of everything. Man, how would you describe, because it sounds like the initial conversation that you had with your friends at lunch started off a conversation and a lifetime journey. What pieces of that conversation have you continued to maintain as a result of seeing the community as a valuable piece of not only government but relationships and things like that?
Yeah, so that's an ongoing conversation, right?
Okay.
Many of those friends I still have today, and we engage regularly. And I think we are all on that same path of trying to make ourselves better, trying to make our communities better,
Yeah.
and identifying the opportunities in order to do so. At the time, it just made sense for
Yeah.
me to engage in the process from a government and political process. Right? There's other times where I've been involved in school things, because that those things were important to me and important to my community. There's times where I've been more involved than others in church activities
Yeah.
because there are certain things that I felt were important to be addressed or to be
Sure.
supported, and things of that nature. So I think people need to be honest with themselves
Okay.
and follow their passions,
Yeah.
and be willing to work towards making the change that they see that's necessary. A lot of times
I like that.
we sit on the side and complain and say that this isn't the way I would like it to be, but we have to make ourselves available
Hmm.
to help make those changes, and bring our best selves every day, and
Hmm.
bring our skills to the
Hmm.
table in order to make change.
Man, I think that you basically have given us a clinic on how to maintain effective relationships, but also how to be immersed in the community. And I know you have wide governmental service, and I was wondering, man, how do you connect all these experiences with working in the government, where it can count sometimes be cutthroat, sometimes per se dog eat dog, and how do you maintain your own integrity inside of a government that's seeking to justify the ends from the means, using taxpayer money and resources to accomplish goals that would affect change in people's life in a positive way, and sometimes in other ways that are divergent of their original meaning?
There's something that you mentioned that I think is key to that, and that's relationships, right?
Okay.
And and viewing everyone that you're engaging with as a human being, and that generally, I mean,
Hmm.
this isn't the case all the time, but I would say it's the case 90% of the time. Generally, the person that you are engaging with is coming to the table with the same end goal,
Mm.
right? And that is to make their community better, or to achieve success for something, whether it's themselves or a client, or ha- whether it's a policy goal or it's a business goal that they have. So they're coming to that to that position from a genuine position of trying to achieve something. And a lot of times what happens, people take on the whatever they're trying to do and forget that there's a person that is managing the thing. And so then engaging with the person, getting to understand the person so that you can better understand their perspective. And as we're able to better understand their perspective, then we can begin to separate the issue from the person.
Yes.
And as we're able to do that, while building a trust relationship with the person,
Yeah.
then we're able to move in a sensible way towards meeting their goal or your goal. You know,
Yeah.
sometimes you will not agree, and sometimes there is not a good place for compromise. So you could end up being on separate paths, but understanding that the person is still a good person, the person has um, a desire to do good, and you may just simply disagree on how to do it. So I found that in my time in government, that there were people who I disagreed with on 90% of the things philosophically, but we were able to work together on most of those things, right?
Mhm.
Because we
Mhm.
all wanted to see things happen for our community. And then the other thing is, as it relates to relationships, is truly understanding and having empathy in terms of thinking of walking in somebody else's shoes. And
Okay.
so as you walk in somebody else's shoes, you kind of begin to understand why they're taking the positions that they're taking, what's driving their philosophy.
Sure.
And so once you understand that, it puts you in a better position to get to the goals that you're seeking to get for your clients or for your community.
Man, I think that you just hit on so many different things, man, that are so valuable, because I think when a lot of people look at a a win-lose situation, some people look at compromises. Oh man, they got me this time. But I hear you saying that if you look at other people's from other people's perspective, you may find that you're seeking the same goal. And I noticed that you have found ways to be able to bring different groups together. I mean, being the whip inside of the House of Representatives for the state, and also working in the PSC, the Public Service Commission, going to the federal government level, testifying, and all those other things that you have done. How have you found that the needs, the relational needs, have either developed or not developed, or before that, could you kind of share a situation where you had to look from both sides in order to get a goal accomplished?
So I'll give you an example that I recall. I was chair of the Public Service Commission, and there was a big case that we were dealing with, and it was a 1.3 billion dollar case that we were addressing. And in that case, there were about 17 interveners, meaning you had
Wow.
17 different groups that were either supporting or opposing um, the case of the entity that came before us. And there were several what we call pro se interveners. And pro se interveners are individuals who are not represented by counsel; they represent themselves.
Wow.
And so usually when that happens, you have individuals who really don't understand the process, don't understand how to manage the process, and you could imagine um, someone who's not an attorney trying to cross-examine people who that's what they do all the time. And so that was not the easiest thing. But at the beginning of the hearing, I brought the parties together to help them understand, look, at the end of the day, we're going to have a process that's fair and equitable for everyone.
Hmm.
And we are going to stay within our rules, but we're going to give a little bit of leeway for these pro se people
Sure.
because it's their right to intervene.
Yeah.
And so we're going to coach them if necessary so that
Wow.
they can get to understand the process. And there were some very powerful entities within state government that were not happy with the fact that we were going to do that. So I remember a specific conversation that I had with some very powerful entities within the state
Yeah.
who wanted the process to be a little bit different.
Mm.
And I remember one of the things that I said in that conversation to the individual who I was speaking with, and I said, "Look, the process is going to work the way it's supposed to work, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, we may take a couple more hours per day to get through these hearings,
Hmm.
but no one's going to be able to say that the hearing wasn't fair.
Hmm.
And whether people like the outcome or don't like the decision that we end up making, they won't be able to attack the process.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so if they can't attack the process,
Yeah.
then we will win on appeal if the issue is appealed. So I hope you understand that by me doing this and operating this way, it protects the process, it protects
Yeah.
the integrity of the process. So ultimately, it gives every commissioner the freedom to decide the way they want to decide without having to be concerned or encumbered by having a flawed process. So I think that that's an example of having a variety of interests that are at the table that are in conflict, but finding a place or a thing that everybody could agree on, and that in this case it was the process.
Yeah.
Having a process that makes sense for everyone, and so therefore protecting the rights of everyone would help protect us from a challenge on process at the appeal level. So if people wanted to challenge us at on appeal based on our decision, that's fine.
Hmm.
Generally, the courts would rule with us
Hmm.
because we bring expertise to the table, and the courts that were all of our cases went either to the first district court of appeals or to the state supreme court, and those courts would generally defer to us
Yeah.
because we brought the expertise to the table so long as the process was clean.
Man, Ronald, I mean, the way that you're describing this is that even if it doesn't matter what issue you have, and it doesn't matter what level someone may be describing, what you basically shared with us, and I hope somebody who's seeing this tonight, we're talking to Ronald Brise, government affairs consultant for a Gunster law firm. And I want you to know today, tonight, that man, you described a process that would help people in every area, whether it's church or community club organization. If you have a clean process that gives everybody a voice, gives everybody an opportunity, and you even went to the point of teaching someone, being willing to teach someone how to be successful, even if it was against what you wanted, even being successful, man. I mean, I think there's a lot to be gained and a lot to be said about that. I was wondering, man, as you look at the government, there's so many people who are watching, confused about what's going on in government. I was wondering, could you help to to untangle, to detangle what government goes, let's say goes from a item to passing a bill to be
Sure.
law, and how does that work? Because everybody's voting now. We have all these bills that we'll be voting on in the next few weeks, or some people may have started voting absentee ballot and things like that already. But could you kind of talk about bills? Because I know in some states there are bills that have a lot of pork in them, or there's something that bills that have a lot of different language in them. Could you talk about that from the government perspective?
Sure. So at all three levels of government, or you can call four levels of government, and when I say four levels, I'm talking about city, county, state, and federal.
Mm-hmm.
The bill making process is essentially the same, right?
Okay.
Um, so whether you're a city council person or a state representative or a congressional member, a senator or a congressperson, um, each one of those members has the ability to file an idea. And so when they file an idea, it's a bill, right? And so if your city council person files an idea, um, it may be called a proposal in certain
Mm-hmm.
certain cities, um, and so there could be variations on the name of what it is that they're proposing, but at the end of the day, it's an idea that they want to turn into a law or an ordinance, right?
Yeah.
At the local level, it's an ordinance. At the state level, it becomes a law, a state law, and eventually a statute. And then at the federal level, it becomes the bill becomes a law, and it becomes a federal statute. And so what the member has to do, they're essentially a lobbyist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they have to take that idea and one, convince the public that it's a good idea.
Mm-hmm.
They have to convince their fellow members of that body that it's a good idea, and get them to support it and affirmatively vote for it, right? And then if it's at certain city levels, where if you have a strong mayor system of government, that mayor has to approve it as well. And so in the state of Florida, for instance, if I have an idea for a piece of legislation or a bill, I have to convince. There's 120 members in the Florida House. I have to convince at least 60 other people that my idea is good, because I have to
Yeah.
get to 61 in order for it to pass the Florida House. I have to convince at least 21 senators, because there's 40 senators in the Florida Senate, that it's a good idea.
Yeah.
And then I have to convince the governor
That's a
that if
lot.
it passes both chambers, that it's a good idea.
Wow.
And at the federal level, they have to convince 435 members of the House, right? Or you split that number in half, and you get that's a number of members. And in the Senate, they have to convince 51 members plus the president. And then you have to work all of the agencies
Mm-hmm.
that your bill will affect,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you're doing an education bill, you have to convince the commissioner of education that your bill makes sense, so that they don't come out and attack your idea. And if your idea has money attached to it, then it's not only an idea that is a policy idea, but it's also an appropriations issue. So
Mm.
then you have to also deal with the appropriations process, and it's almost a dual track that you're following to get both of those sets of committees to agree, and ultimately get those things passed. But it begins with a solid idea that has support within your community to
Wow.
get it through the process.
Man, so
And so
everything starts with an idea, and everything starts to move, and then the relationships that you were speaking of earlier help to drive that through a clean process,
right.
as you have shared, to be able to make ideas to reality, to go from bills to law, and then be debated by go from bills to law to be debated by and lived out by everyone in whatever municipality or government section that you have described. Man,
Absolutely.
I mean, Ronald, man, you have kind of demystified a lot of things tonight for us and share with us a lot of wonderful resources. Want to come back on the other side and talk a little bit more about voting and the census and even Decision 2020, with a
Right.
lot of with its prickly nature of how it has been decided so far. We'll be right back in just a moment with Ronald Brise, government affairs consultant. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We'll be right back after these messages.
Our fight against coronavirus isn't over. We still have to slow the spread and do our part. Let's wear face masks in public. Stay 6 feet or more from others. Follow state and local guidelines. Wash our hands frequently and stay home when we feel safe. For ourselves, for our loved ones, for our future. Let's move forward together. Learn more at coronavirus.gov.
Shout out to the hip hop public health. All the healthcare workers on the front line. Together, we can make a difference.
What's good, y'all? This is Doug D. Fresh coming at you live and direct. All of y'all out there, got a couple of things I want to talk to y'all about. Wash your hands, everybody, and everybody, wash your hands.
20 seconds.
Come on, wash your hands, everybody, and everybody, wash your hands. My people uptown, wash your hands. My people downtown, wash your hands. People from the East Coast, wash your hands. People from the West Coast, wash your hands. That's right.
First and foremost, please listen close. Take your time, wash. Use a lot of soap from the front to the back, back to the front. Sing the hook where you at. That's exactly what we want. If you decide to leave, please take heed. Talk a social distance, at least 6 feet. On a bus or the train, riding in your car. The further you're away, then the better off you are. 20 seconds or more. You gotta be able to wash your hands like you never ever washed them before. 20 seconds or more. Try to wait, you'll make the greatest mistake. You need to wash them when you enter the door. 20 seconds or more. Take your time, sing a song, spit a rhyme. When you finish, you can put on some gloves. 20 seconds or more. It's very important to wash your hands. You're protecting everybody you love.
Wash your hands, everybody, and everybody, wash your hands.
20 seconds.
Come on, wash your hands, everybody, and everybody, wash your hands.
Inspiration, a man of great integrity. And I'll tell you that he has given us a lot to think about. But I'll tell you, Ronald, man, after you have spoken, there are a lot of people who have chimed in on what you have said. People talked about the process. Melissa talks about the process, that how you get from idea to passing a bill. And then, Ronald, maybe tonight we can launch the new campaign. Justin Pierre says, Brise for governor 2024. Come on, Florida. Come on, Florida. So you never know. Hey, listen, when you come on the network, you never know what will happen. But tonight, man, I want to talk to you not only about this, but man, you speak a lot of languages too. I mean, English is not your only language that you speak. And I want to talk to you about culture and voting and the census and how everything works together. Because from what I understand, that what we fill out on the census actually affects how life is lived in our locale. So could you talk a little bit about the census?
Sure, certainly appreciate the opportunity to talk about the census and the importance of the census. Just a brief background on the census. Every 10 years, we take account of how many people live within the country. And the purpose of that is to help reapportion resources throughout the country. And that is federal resources that will be apportioned to every state, every municipality, every county throughout the country. And then there is a second component to that is important, is it also governs how many people will represent you in Congress. And so as states grow in number, you get more members of Congress. As states lose population, then they lose the number of representation within Congress. And so that also triggers what we call redistricting. And so redistricting is just resetting the lines so that there is representation or the drawing of the districts based upon where people live. And so, it is extremely important that if you haven't filled out your census information, that you go ahead and do that. I think the Supreme Court just voted this week that the census is going to end at the end of this month rather than the December extension that folk were seeking, that the lower court had originally moved it to. So We need to make sure that we fill out the census if you haven't filled it out, because when you think about, I just want you to think about it like this from a budget perspective.
Yeah.
If you have today, you have 10 people in your house, right? Um, and 5 years ago, you had 5 people in your house. The government doesn't know that you've grown by 5. And
Wow.
and if there's money that's supposed to be apportioned for each one of those extra 5, and you don't fill out the census, that means when there's money that needs to come for roads, that's 5 people that's not being accounted for.
Mm-hmm.
If there's hospitals that need to be built,
Mm-hmm.
that's 5 people that's not accounted for. So that means Medicaid dollars, Medicare dollars, the number of schools that have to be built, the number of seats in classrooms that have to be available.
Wow.
That information is not available because people haven't filled out the census.
Wow.
So it is extremely important for people to fill out the census, because that is the way the government knows how many people are in a particular area. And so, you take New York, for instance. New
Yeah.
York is losing seats in Congress while Florida is gaining seats in Congress.
Wow.
That's because you have the migration pattern of people from up north coming here in the South. But if people don't fill the census out,
Wow.
then those seats will not come to Florida because no one knows that those people are there.
Man, I mean, Ronald, so just simply filling out the census will let the government know not only that there are people here, but also of the needs of the community, and also potentially reimbursements, grants, and other items that are useful for the community. Now, man, we might as well go to the red hot button tonight and talk about voting and the issue with voting. So the other day I was on a prayer line. I was at a 5 a.m. prayer line. I don't know why I did it, but it was 5 a.m. And so I was on this 5 a.m. prayer line doing a devotion. And at the end of the devotional time, people were asking for prayer requests. And then this gentleman blurted out and said, he was a elderly African-American gentleman. And he said, "This is the first time that I am voting." And so, man, my mouth dropped open. I said, "Man, first time?" He said, "Before, I used to just let God handle it because I know God's going to handle it anyway." And man, could you talk to us tonight about, tell us what the importance of voting, what does it do, and what makes it meaningful, and why does it matter?
Sure. So I think that gentleman is not alone. I think this week Shaquille O'Neal confessed that this is going to be the first election that he's actually voting in. So,
Wow.
um, and voting is extremely important. And you think about the history of this country, right? And you think about, there was a time where Black people were considered 3/5 of a person, and when people didn't own land, they weren't able to vote, and all of the challenges that people have gone through in order for us to have the right to vote, and for women to have the right to vote, and for all of us to be able to become full citizens and have the ability to participate in the process. So your vote is essentially your voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you do not engage in that process, you're allowing someone else to be your voice.
Mm.
And so I always used to tell my constituents, when I was in elected office, jokingly, look, if you didn't vote, you really don't have a right to complain.
Yeah, that's true.
Because truthfully, if you didn't want me to serve you, you could have voted against me.
Yeah.
And if you voted for me, then it is my responsibility, not only to you, but also to those who didn't vote for me, to be your voice. And if you don't express to me your interests and concerns, then I can't effectively be your voice. So people need to be sure that they use that right, to vote. Now, there are several ways that people can vote.
Right.
Right? They can vote by mail, right? They can get an absentee ballot in Florida, and in many states they can do the same thing. They can get a ballot, and then they can turn it in to the Supervisor of election, many states have these drop boxes where you can choose to turn it in that way. You can mail it back in. You can also, instead of voting early, you can turn it in during the time of early voting. There's a couple things that I want to make sure that people always remember, that if you are voting by mail, that you make sure that you sign your ballot. If your state requires you to sign it, that you sign it. And then once you've signed it and mailed it in, that you check with the supervisor of election to make sure that your ballot counts. In other words, make sure that the signature that they have on file matches your signature so that your ballot would count. Most
Mm.
states will also give you an opportunity to cure that issue. And so if you vote by mail, you have to pay attention to see if you get mail or a call from the supervisors of election so that you can go ahead and cure that deficiency if that occurs. There were hundreds of thousands of people who throughout the country whose ballots were invalidated simply because their signatures didn't match. The
Wow.
other thing, you need to understand the rules within your state.
Mm.
Some states require that you bring an ID in
Yeah.
order for you to vote. So you need to make sure that you bring the appropriate ID necessary for you to vote. The other thing, you need to become acquainted with the issues,
Yes.
right? So most states, most municipalities will send you a sample ballot. Take the time to read that ballot, understand the issues. There are resources all over the place for you to sort of understand the variety of issues. I always think identifying the candidates is probably the easiest part on the ballot.
Mm.
You go to
Mm.
the website, you see what the person is running for, what their positions are on a variety of things. But some of the more challenging things are the amendment language issues that show up on ballots. This time in Florida, we have 6 items that are amendment issues on the ballot. And so you have to become acquainted with those issues. Very often, there's municipal issues that are important, charter amendments
Mhm.
that are on the ballot. So you have to become acquainted with those issues so that when you show up to vote, I always go and I consider myself someone who has a small understanding of this process.
I
I
think big
always
and small.
I fill out my ballot, um, my my practice ballot, what I call it, is the ballot that the supervisor of elections sends me so I can sort of look at it. And then when I go vote, I take it with me
Mhm.
because I've done the research and I've done everything and I filled it out. So when I show up to vote, I have it with me and I can go ahead and fill out. The other thing is, make sure that you fill out the ballot correctly,
Yes.
right? If you have one category of things, let's say, and I'm just taking the presidential thing, there's probably going to be 7 sets of candidates on the presidential ballot. Make sure if it tells you to bubble it in, bubble one in,
Yeah.
right? If you bubble 2 in, then you've nullified your vote. If it
Wow.
says check the box, then check the box,
Yeah.
right? If you check multiple boxes or your check is not complete or the system won't be able to read it, then you just nullified your ballot. So those are some simple things that people need to do to make sure that their ballot ends up counting and that their voice gets counted in the process. And then the other thing I would say, after the election is over, use your voice,
Mm.
right? When your elected officials have town hall meetings, show
Mhm.
up.
Mhm.
Let them know these are some issues and items that are of interest to you and of concern to you. Send their offices emails to let them know that these things are important to you. And that way you remain engaged with the process. And then that helps the person who's making decisions on your behalf, because ultimately what you are doing when you vote, you empower somebody to make decisions on your behalf. And so it's extremely important that we remain engaged in the process.
Now I know that some people say, Ronald, some people say, man, I'm going to vote for the president of the United States. I'm going to vote for the president or vice president, my choice, but I'm not going to vote in the state elections because they really don't matter. Could you talk
Yeah.
about the importance of voting for all the elections and for all the amendments and bills that may come before someone? Somebody might just check Trump or Biden, since those are the candidates for this year. But could you talk about the importance of the state
Sure.
elections as well?
Sure, absolutely. So as we talked about the federal level, that's Medicare, that's federal aid, colleges and things of that nature. That's federal roadways, national security. All of those issues are at the federal level, right? The levels of government that affect you the most on the daily basis that you feel generally are your local, meaning your city and your county,
Yeah.
and then your state. So what generally happens is, when you pay your taxes, when you pay your federal taxes, your money goes up to the federal government, and then based upon the census information, the census data, that money flows back to the state.
Mm-hmm.
The state then, through its appropriation process, determines how much money, based upon each agency and based upon population data, that money then flows down from that to your local county and city governments. And your county commissioners and your county mayor decide how that money is going to be spent.
Mm.
And so and then you also have your school board that determines all of those things for the schools, right? What they're doing with respect to schools, are they going to build new buildings, etc. Your county government determines, are we going to build new healthcare facilities? Are we going to build new roads? What are the important things for our county? Your city does the same thing. It just does it for a smaller geographic area. So if I don't vote for the people who are running my city, when they when they allow a shopping plaza to be built right across from where I live,
Yeah.
and that's not what I had in mind,
Yeah.
if I'm not engaged, they can't know that is something of interest to me.
Yeah.
And so if someone was running on the platform, well, we want to turn whatever your city you live in into a place that attracts certain types of businesses, and I didn't get engaged in that process by voting for or against based upon my personal philosophy, then I have given that person authority to act on my behalf without my input. And
Mm.
so state levels, state level is important. Your local elections are extremely important. But as we mentioned before, all of the elections are important because each one of the levels of government are extremely important as they all work together in one form or fashion to make our lives better or worse, depending upon who the decision makers are.
Man, that's so true. And I think that a lot of people kind of wonder if their voice matters. And you said something recent just a moment ago that kind of piqued my interest. And you said that after the election is over, after you vote, hold your elected officials accountable by going to town halls or other sessions where there will be opportunities for feedback. But I was wondering, you talked about email. Do elected officials really listen to or open their email? I mean, these are very busy people, high powered individuals. Man, I mean, are they? What is it like to connect with someone who is an elected official? Do they really respond?
Sure. Most elected officials have a pretty sophisticated operation to manage constituent communications,
Okay.
right? And so they have staff that help go through that, right? And I will tell you that when I was in office, there were certain things that there were certain pieces of legislation that garnered a whole lot of attention,
Okay.
and that you can get 5,000 emails on an issue on a particular day,
Wow.
and then some of those were form emails. So you
Sure.
knew that you opened the first 100 and all of them said the same thing, is just a name. So you just knew that the volume
Yeah.
there was going to be important.
Yeah.
Um, but I would say that most members either read those emails themselves
Wow.
or have staff members
Sure.
who are dedicated to reading the input that's coming from constituents. I remember that when I served, I would have stacks when I came into my office
Hmm.
of different types of communications that would come in, and part of my job was to really go through the communication. Now your staff would sort of go through them first and sort of organize them and help you um, determine sort of the level of not importance, but level of attention that it required at the time. There are certain things which were more emergency type things, or certain things were more long term things that you had to deal with. But your team would read all of them,
Wow.
and so I would say that generally most responsible elected officials do a pretty good job at least understanding what's coming in the door, and most of them are fairly decent at responding as well,
Mm.
right? And so that's important, right? I mean, because if you reach out, you send an email, um, you show up at a town hall meeting, you raise your hand, and you say, Representative such and such, or council person such and such, or Congress member such and such, I sent you an email
Hmm.
on this issue on such and such a date. Here is my copy of my email.
Yeah.
And so I'm going to ask you the same question I asked in my email because I did not receive a response
Yeah.
when I sent this email. Or I thank you for this response. So now I want more information on your position on this particular issue. All of a sudden, you have become someone that office is going to pay a whole lot of attention to,
Mm.
right? And so being engaged in the process is extremely important. And I think as we have already addressed, and you have addressed, that if you do not use your voice, you have silenced it.
Mm. Man, that's a powerful last statement, that if you don't use your voice, you have silenced it. And man, it seems like, Ronald, you've been surrounded by a great team of people who have connected you and believed in you all the way through, a great family system that has kind of encouraged you to keep going forward and supported your vision and goals. What would you say to somebody who may be watching now or later, who may have political aspirations? They want to dive into the political process. They want to get involved in government affairs. What would you say to someone? What would be some practical steps that you would give to somebody as they look forward to the process, whether they're older or younger or just want to see change happen?
Sure. The first thing I would say for someone who wants to get in this space is understand why they want to get into this space,
Hmm.
right? Motivation is extremely important. Um, and what I mean by motivation is, I'm not talking about your drive. I'm talking about in terms of knowing what you're trying to get out of it, and what's driving you to do it, right? So check yourself before you decide to get into this space, because this space could be corrupting at the very least.
Mm.
Because there's a lot of money involved,
Yeah.
there's a lot of influence involved, and in this process, people can be used for a lot of different things at different times. So if you don't understand your motivation, um, then you might end up being an unwitting part of something that you don't want to be part of.
Yeah.
I think that's to be grounded in that fact. Then one needs to find opportunities to understand the process, understand the dynamics of what they want to get into, um, and figure out what makes the most sense, right? I mean, depending upon what stage someone is in their life, if you're in college, doing an internship, at a, volunteering at an with an elected official, is a great opportunity. Um, if one is, say, in grad school, there are fellowship programs with governors and senators and all of that. Those are great opportunities to understand the process, understand the policy pieces that are involved. And going back to the passion piece, if one is passionate about, say, healthcare,
Yeah.
or childcare services, or education, or energy and utilities, you name it, that could be a reason for them to get into this space,
Yeah.
because there may be policy objectives that they are interested in, and they engage in that process. The other thing is, as with any profession, but particularly with this profession, is learning how to interact with people,
Mm-hmm.
how to network, how to deal with people who have different approaches and backgrounds from them, and so that's important. One of the things that worked for me, and this lends to my background. So I was born in Port-au-Prince, Haiti.
Mm-hmm.
I lived in Honduras and Argentina, and I came to the U.S. when I was 7. So you mentioned the language thing. So I grew up in an environment that I had to learn how to deal with different cultures and different people. So that became part of who I am. And so for those who don't have that similar background,
Yeah.
they have to learn how to interact with folk who are coming to things from a different perspective, and that's extremely important. And the last thing I'll say on that is being willing to learn, right? Um, being willing to learn, I think, is a sign of humility.
Mm-hmm.
Um, you know, most people think they're smart, right? Right. And so you walk in the room and you want to hear yourself talk. Well, it's much more important for you to listen, um, and spend time learning, and that will go a long way, within this process, and I think in general.
Man, Ronald, you have given us so much information, so much insight, and thank you so much for being with us tonight. As we prepare to wrap up, I was wondering, man, any final word that you'd like to give to those who are watching now or the rebroadcast about government affairs, about voting, or anything? Any final word that you would have?
Uh, Use your voice. Use it effectively. If it's too late to register to vote, in most states, but if in your state you still can register, go ahead and register. Do your research and make sure that you make your vote count. This election is probably one of the most pivotal elections in our lifetime, and I know people have said that, many times, but I think anyone who's paying attention to anything, um, can see that this election is extremely important. And so use your voice through your vote, um, and allow professionally, and as you learn, as you decide what you're trying to do, and how to use your voice effectively outside of the vote, allow God to lead you and guide you as you make some of those decisions.
Man, Ronald, thank you so much for being here tonight. Just want to know, how can we contact you if someone wants to reach out to you for some advice, some consultation, or somebody from a place that you may do business with or connect with in some other way? What was the best way that they can contact you?
Sure. Probably the best way is via email for me, and that's rbrise@gunster.com. That's probably the best way for someone who's interested in engaging with me on a professional level.
Man, Ronald, thank you so much for being here tonight. And as always, we look forward to connecting with you and collaborating with you in the future. And thank you again. Blessings to you and to your family. Every week, we'll be here on the network. And you can go and watch rebroadcasts on builttothrive.me/resources, and you'll find information on what's going on. Thank you again for joining us tonight. We hope that you have a great and blessed week. But most of all, after tonight, if you heard nothing else, please make sure to vote and be involved in the process. Until Saturday morning, we'll see you on Word Power. But until then, I hope that you stay blessed and most of all, stay safe and well. Have a great night. Thank you again, Ronald.
My pleasure. Thank you.